In 1500 BC, deep in the Amazon rainforest, a civilization did something that modern science still cannot fully explain. They burned wood, but they didn't burn it the way you think. They burned it slowly, with restricted oxygen, until the wood became something else entirely. Not ash, not charcoal for cooking, something that looked like black gold. They buried it in the worst soil on Earth. Amazonian soil is naturally acidic, nutrient-poor, and almost useless for agriculture. Rainforest fertility exists in the canopy, not the ground. Every agronomist knows this. But the soil these people created was different. 2,000 years later, scientists discovered patches of impossibly rich, jet-black earth scattered across the Amazon basin, soil so fertile that local farmers fought over access to it, soil that grew crops 3 to 4 times more productive than surrounding ground. They called it Terra Preta, black earth. And it had been fertile for over 2,000 years without a single application of fertilizer. 2,000 years. No fertilizer, no amendments, no maintenance. Just ancient burnt wood still feeding crops as if it were applied yesterday. Modern soil scientists tested Terra Preta and found something that broke their understanding of how soil works. The burnt wood hadn't decomposed. It was still there, still holding nutrients, still feeding biology, still improving drainage and water retention simultaneously. Nothing in modern agriculture does what this burnt wood does. And the fertilizer industry has spent decades making sure you never learn how to make it. Today, Americans spend $25 billion annually on synthetic fertilizers, products that wash away with every rain, products that must be reapplied every season, products that destroy the soil biology they claim to support. Meanwhile, a technique perfected 3,000 years ago creates permanent soil fertility from wood you can burn in your backyard. In this video, we are opening a file on the most suppressed soil amendment in agricultural history, a substance that makes fertilizer obsolete, a material so effective that one application lasts decades, and the billion-dollar industry that depends on you buying bags instead of burning branches. If this knowledge matters to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Every like and share preserves what they tried to erase. The vault is open. In 1870, a geologist named James Orton traveled the Amazon River documenting soil samples. He found what every scientist before him had found: thin, acidic, nutrient-poor soil unsuitable for sustained agriculture, except in certain places. Scattered along riverbanks and near ancient settlement sites, Orton discovered patches of deep black soil unlike anything surrounding them. The patches ranged from 2 to over 200 acres. Some were several feet deep. Local farmers called them Terra Preta do Indio, black earth of the Indians. They knew the soil was man-made. They knew it was ancient. They knew it grew anything you planted in it. Orton collected samples, but didn't understand what he had found. The samples sat in collections for decades. In the 1950s, Dutch soil scientist Wim Sombroek began systematic study of Terra Preta. What he found was impossible by everything modern soil science believed. The soil was 10 to 40 times more fertile than surrounding Amazonian soil. Nutrient levels were off the charts. Phosphorus concentrations were 200 to 400 times higher than adjacent ground. Nitrogen levels were dramatically elevated. Carbon content was astronomical. But here's what truly stunned researchers: the soil was regenerating itself. Terra Preta, sites that had been continuously farmed for decades, showed no decline in fertility. Some sites actually became more fertile over time. The soil was not being depleted by agriculture, it was being improved by it. No soil on Earth behaves this way. Every agricultural system in human history depletes soil over time. That's why fertilizers exist. That's why crop rotation exists. That's why civilizations collapse when they exhaust their farmland. Terra Preta broke all these rules, and the secret was the burnt wood mixed into every sample. Not ash, not regular charcoal. A specific form of carbonized wood created by slow, oxygen-restricted burning. A substance modern scientists now call biochar. The fertilizer industry heard about this research, and they had a very specific reaction. They ignored it. When you burn wood in a normal fire, temperatures exceed 800 degrees and oxygen is abundant. The wood converts almost entirely to ash and carbon dioxide. What remains is mineral residue with minimal structural value. But when you burn wood slowly with restricted oxygen, something fundamentally different happens. The process is called pyrolysis. Temperatures between 300 and 700 degrees Celsius. Limited air supply. The wood doesn't combust, it transforms. Volatile compounds cook off as gas and smoke. What remains is a carbon skeleton. The original wood structure, preserved at molecular level, but converted to nearly pure carbon. Stable carbon that resists decomposition for centuries. Under an electron microscope, biochar looks like a sponge designed by an engineer. Millions of microscopic pores per gram. Surface area so vast that a single handful of biochar has the internal surface area of an entire football field. That is not an exaggeration. The measured surface area of quality biochar ranges from 200 to 500 square meters per gram. A teaspoon of biochar has more surface area than your kitchen. This pore structure is what makes biochar revolutionary. Every pore is a habitat for soil microorganisms. Bacteria colonize the surfaces. Fungi thread through the channels. The microscopic architecture provides shelter, moisture, and nutrient access that keeps biology thriving. The carbon itself carries a negative electrical charge. In soil chemistry, this means it attracts and holds positively charged nutrient ions: calcium, magnesium, potassium, ammonium. The nutrients that plants need most are the nutrients that biochar grabs and refuses to release until plant roots request them. This is called cation exchange capacity. It is the single most important measure of soil fertility, and biochar increases it by 50 to 300% depending on soil type. Synthetic fertilizers have zero cation exchange capacity. They dissolve in water and wash away. You apply them, rain comes, they're gone. Into the groundwater, into the rivers, into the ocean, creating dead zones while your garden goes hungry. Biochar holds nutrients in the root zone permanently. Rain doesn't wash them away. They stay available to plants for years, for decades, for centuries. The fertilizer industry sells products designed to leave your soil. Biochar creates soil that holds everything your plants need. The business models are incompatible. Research from Cornell University measured what happens when biochar is added to agricultural soil. The results explain why you've never seen biochar advertised on television. Crop yields increased 20 to 200% depending on soil type and crop. The greatest improvements occurred in degraded soils, exactly the soils that currently consume the most purchased fertilizer. Water retention improved 18 to 25%. Soil that previously required irrigation held moisture through dry periods. Watering frequency dropped dramatically. Fertilizer efficiency increased by 10 to 30%. When fertilizer was applied to biochar amended soil, less fertilizer was needed to achieve the same results. The biochar held nutrients that would otherwise wash away. Soil biology exploded. Microbial populations increased 40 to 400%. Mycorrhizal fungi colonization improved dramatically. The living systems that make soil function were supercharged by biochar's habitat structure. And here is the number that the fertilizer industry truly fears. One application of biochar continues improving soil for a minimum of 100 years. Not one season, not 1 year, 1 century. The Terra Preta sites in the Amazon prove that biochar persists and functions for millennia. The fertilizer industry's entire business model depends on annual reapplication. You buy fertilizer this spring, it washes away by fall. You buy more next spring, the cycle never ends. The dependency never breaks. Biochar breaks the cycle permanently. A farmer who applies biochar once may never need to purchase fertilizer again. A gardener who amends their beds with biochar creates permanent fertility that outlasts their lifetime. The fertilizer industry generates $25 billion annually in the United States alone, $200 billion globally. Every dollar depends on soil that cannot hold nutrients without help. Biochar creates soil that holds nutrients forever. Now you understand why this information stays buried. Biochar does not just improve soil, it removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere permanently. When a tree grows, it absorbs CO2 through photosynthesis. Carbon becomes wood. When the tree dies and decomposes, that carbon returns to the atmosphere. The cycle is carbon neutral. But when wood is converted to biochar through pyrolysis, something different happens. The carbon is locked into a structure that resists decomposition for centuries. Bury that biochar in soil and the carbon stays underground for 1,000 years or more. The tree pulled carbon from the air. Pyrolysis locked it permanently. The carbon cycle is broken in our favor. Scientists call this carbon negative technology, not carbon neutral. Carbon negative, it actually removes greenhouse gases from the atmosphere while simultaneously improving food production. The International Biochar Initiative calculated that widespread biochar use could sequester 1.8 billion tons of CO2 annually. That represents roughly 12% of current global greenhouse gas emissions. No other technology achieves carbon removal and agricultural improvement simultaneously. Solar panels don't grow food. Carbon capture machines don't improve soil. Electric cars don't increase crop yields. Biochar does all three. Remove carbon, improve soil, increase food production, with technology available to any farmer on Earth. Climate conferences debate carbon credits worth trillions. Governments fund experimental capture technologies. Corporations promise net zero by distant future dates. And a method perfected in 1500 BC already works, already proven, already available, already ignored. The fossil fuel industry cannot profit from biochar. The fertilizer industry loses revenue from biochar. The carbon credit trading industry becomes less relevant because of biochar. $3 trillion industries have zero incentive to promote the solution that actually works. The ancient Amazonians made biochar without modern equipment. You can too. The simplest method is called top-lit updraft. It requires a metal container, dry wood, and fire, nothing else. Take a steel drum, a large metal trash can, or even a hole in the ground lined with rocks. Fill it with dry wood cut to roughly uniform size. Small branches and wood scraps work perfectly. Light the fire from the top. This is critical. Lighting from the top means the fire burns downward. Flames consume the volatile gases rising from wood below. The wood underneath is heated but starved of oxygen by the fire above. As the fire descends, the wood it has already passed through converts to biochar. The material glows red, then turns black. The carbon skeleton forms while combustion gases burn away above. When the fire reaches the bottom and all wood is converted, quench with water immediately. This stops the process before biochar becomes ash. The water hisses, steam rises, and you're left with chunks of pure carbon. The entire process takes 1 to 3 hours depending on container size. The result is pounds of biochar from materials that would otherwise be waste. Before use, biochar should be charged. Fresh biochar is empty. Those millions of pores contain nothing. If you add uncharged biochar to soil, it will temporarily absorb nutrients from surrounding earth, creating short-term deficiency before long-term benefit. Charging is simple. Soak the biochar in compost tea, urine diluted 10 to 1, liquid fertilizer, or simply mix it into your compost pile for 2 weeks. The pores fill with nutrients and biology. The biochar arrives in your garden already loaded with what plants need. Crush the charged biochar to roughly pea size or smaller. Incorporate into the top 6 inches of garden soil at a rate of 10 to 20% by volume. That's it. One afternoon of work, permanent soil improvement, no annual purchase, no subscription, no dependency on any company. The fertilizer industry cannot sell you a recurring product if one application lasts forever. This is why you learned about fertilizer in school but never heard the word biochar. The ancient Amazonians made biochar without modern equipment. You can too. The simplest method is called top-lit updraft. It requires a metal container, dry wood, and fire, nothing else. Take a steel drum, a large metal trash can, or even a hole in the ground lined with rocks. Fill it with dry wood cut to roughly uniform size. Small branches and wood scraps work perfectly. Light the fire from the top. This is critical. Lighting from the top means the fire burns downward. Flames consume the volatile gases rising from wood below. The wood underneath is heated but starved of oxygen by the fire above. As the fire descends, the wood it has already passed through converts to biochar. The material glows red, then turns black. The carbon skeleton forms while combustion gases burn away above. When the fire reaches the bottom and all wood is converted, quench with water immediately. This stops the process before biochar becomes ash. The water hisses, steam rises, and you're left with chunks of pure carbon. The entire process takes 1 to 3 hours depending on container size. The result is pounds of biochar from materials that would otherwise be waste. Before use, biochar should be charged. Fresh biochar is empty. Those millions of pores contain nothing. If you add uncharged biochar to soil, it will temporarily absorb nutrients from surrounding earth, creating short-term deficiency before long-term benefit. Charging is simple. Soak the biochar in compost tea, urine diluted 10 to 1, liquid fertilizer, or simply mix it into your compost pile for 2 weeks. The pores fill with nutrients and biology. The biochar arrives in your garden already loaded with what plants need. Crush the charged biochar to roughly pea size or smaller. Incorporate into the top 6 inches of garden soil at a rate of 10 to 20% by volume. That's it. One afternoon of work, permanent soil improvement, no annual purchase, no subscription, no dependency on any company. The fertilizer industry cannot sell you a recurring product if one application lasts forever. This is why you learned about fertilizer in school but never heard the word biochar. Global agriculture consumes 70% of all fresh water used by humanity. As aquifers deplete and droughts intensify, water scarcity threatens food production worldwide. Biochar addresses this crisis directly. The pore structure that holds nutrients also holds water. Biochar can absorb and retain up to 6 times its weight in water. Soil amended with biochar holds significantly more moisture than untreated soil. Field studies across multiple continents show consistent results. Biochar amended fields require 20 to 30% less irrigation to achieve equivalent yields. In drought conditions, the difference becomes more dramatic. Crops in biochar soil survive dry periods that kill crops in conventional soil. The mechanism is straightforward. Rain falls, biochar absorbs water into millions of microscopic pores. The water is held against gravity but available to plant roots. Between rains, plants draw moisture from biochar reserves that would otherwise have drained away or evaporated. In sandy soils, where water drains through instantly, biochar acts as a sponge that creates water-holding capacity where none existed. In clay soils, where water pools and creates anaerobic conditions, biochar improves drainage while simultaneously improving retention. It solves opposite problems because pore structure addresses both. The irrigation industry generates billions annually selling equipment, systems, and water access. Municipalities charge for water delivery. The entire infrastructure depends on soil that cannot hold water efficiently. Biochar creates soil that holds water efficiently. One application. Permanent improvement. Reduced dependency on purchased water. California's agricultural industry alone spends over $3 billion annually on irrigation water. A 25% reduction represents $750 million in savings from a soil amendment that can be made from agricultural waste for nearly nothing. But no one profits from selling farmers something that reduces their water bills permanently. The incentive structure prevents adoption. The solution exists. The economics of existing industries prevent implementation. The synthetic fertilizer industry has a simple problem with biochar. It makes their products unnecessary. In 1909, Fritz Haber developed the process for synthesizing ammonia from atmospheric nitrogen. Carl Bosch scaled it industrially. The Haber-Bosch process enabled mass production of nitrogen fertilizer. It transformed agriculture. It fed billions. It also created a dependency worth hundreds of billions of dollars annually. The industry that grew from Haber-Bosch needs farmers to buy fertilizer every season. Their business requires soil that cannot sustain crops without purchased inputs. Their revenue depends on depletion. Biochar creates soil that sustains crops without purchased inputs. It breaks the dependency cycle. It converts customers into self-sufficient producers. The industry response has been predictable. Research funding for biochar remains minuscule compared to synthetic fertilizer research. Agricultural extension services rarely mention biochar. University programs funded by fertilizer companies don't teach it. The knowledge gap is maintained through selective funding. Regulatory frameworks don't accommodate biochar. It is not classified as a fertilizer because it isn't one. It is not classified as a soil amendment consistently. The lack of regulatory clarity creates uncertainty that discourages adoption. Marketing budgets are asymmetric beyond comprehension. The fertilizer industry spends billions on advertising, dealer networks, and farmer education programs. Biochar has no industry backing, no television commercials, no dealer network, no sponsored university programs. The information asymmetry is engineered, not through conspiracy, through the simple economics of who profits from which information being widely known. Farmers hear about fertilizer because companies pay to tell them. Farmers don't hear about biochar because no company profits from telling them. The most effective soil amendment in human history remains virtually unknown while the least efficient inputs dominate agriculture. This is not accident. This is economics. The Terra Preta of the Amazon has been fertile for over 2,000 years. No fertilizer company existed to maintain it. No chemical inputs were required. No annual purchases were made. The soil fed civilizations for millennia on a single amendment of burnt wood. Today, you can make the same amendment in your backyard in an afternoon. You can transform dead dirt into living soil permanently. You can break free from the cycle of annual fertilizer purchases that the industry needs you to continue. The knowledge is ancient. The science is proven. The method is simple. The only question is why you're hearing about it now instead of decades ago. The vault is open.